good morning, or good afternoon, depending on where you're joining from. My name is Jermaine Whiteside. I am a doctoral candidate at Liberty University School of Divinity, and this research is presented in my personal capacity through my affiliation with IAM of America, Inc. I want to begin not with a concept, but with a scenario. Imagine a seminary student submitting a spiritual reflection, an honest account of doubt. In a healthy formation context, that moment invites discernment, relational engagement, and theological care. Instead, the essay is evaluated by an AI grading system. The student receives a score of 58 out of 100. The system has interpreted emotional struggle as a deficiency. No human educator ever reads the work. While this exact scenario is not yet documented in theological education, the underlying mechanism, automated scoring systems penalizing emotional complexity, is supported by peer reviewed research. The issue, therefore, is not speculative, it is already emergent. This raises a central question, not about technology, but about formation. This presentation introduces faithful intelligence, a normative theological framework for evaluating artificial intelligence in religious education. The central claim is this: AI must be understood not merely as a tool, but as a formative authority shaping moral reasoning, epistemic trust, and patterns of belief. Theologically, formation is not efficient, it is dialectical. It requires friction, relational encounter, and critical appropriation. AI systems, by contrast, are optimized for efficiency and frictionless delivery. This creates a structural tension not based on current limitations, but on fundamentally different logics. Methodologically, this study develops a normative theoretical framework designed for subsequent comparative and empirical application across educational and religious contexts. The session will move through the problem, the framework, three applied scenarios, four field aligned cases, a governance model, and open discussion. I welcome engagement throughout. This matrix translates the framework into institutional decision making across three domains: curriculum, assessment, and student inquiry. The key shift is this: AI is not evaluated only by what it produces, but by how it shapes formation when used. First, curriculum. An AI system can generate a theology unit in seconds. The question is not whether the content is structurally accurate. The question is whether the educator's contextual and pastoral judgment has been displaced. When different communities receive the same AI generated curriculum, local formation conditions, history, context, denominational identity are flattened. The Acadia Divinity College case illustrates this clearly. An AI generated reading list skewed Baptist and required significant human correction before it was usable. Second, assessment. Efficiency driven models reduce theological and moral reflection to quantifiable outputs. The faithful intelligence model requires something different: human in the loop evaluation grounded in dignity and formation. These are not the same tasks performed with different tools. They are fundamentally different forms of evaluation. Third, student inquiry. When a student defers a theological question to an automated system, the issue is not simply efficiency, it is formation. A pattern of inquiry is being practiced, one that privileges algorithmic synthesis over dialectical engagement with tradition. Over time, this forms a particular kind of religious knower. The question the framework raises is this the kind of formation our institutions intend to cultivate? Application example: the distinction is practical. An AI system that generates a full lecture displaces the educator's formative role. An AI system that supports discussion by generating prompts that students interpret, debate, and connect to lived experience remains properly instrumental. The difference is not technological, it is theological. Close the slide. In this way, the framework functions as a decision structure, not whether to use AI, but how its use aligns or conflicts with the goals of formation. Transition, the educator, therefore, cannot step out of the loop. The next slide explains why that intervention is itself the formative act. This slide illustrates a repeatable intervention methodology derived from the framework. Panel 1, AI output. A seminary professor uses AI to summarize Augustine's Confessions. The system produces a coherent, well structured summary. It appears competent and usable. Panel 2, friction. At this point, the limitation becomes visible. The summary flattens Augustine's theological voice. It removes the tension between the restless heart of Book 1 and the resolution of Book 9. It omits the historical complexity surrounding grace and free will. It presents conversion as linear rather than agonistic. What remains is the structure of Augustine without the struggle. And in Confessions, the struggle is the theology. Panel 3, intervention. The educator intervenes. Students are tasked with comparing the AI generated summary to the original text and identifying interpretive distortions. They are not consuming content, they are practicing discernment. The discernment principle becomes the analytical lens. Interpretive outcome, this is the key shift. AI is repositioned from a formative authority to a critical object of evaluation. The educator's intervention is the formative act. Formation occurs not through the AI synthesis, but through the student's engagement, critique, and interpretive work. This aligns directly with Groom's model of shared praxis, particularly the movement of critical reflection on present action. Transparency statement. To be precise, this scenario reflects documented patterns of AI misrepresentation in theological texts rather than a single institutional case. What is well established is that AI systems produce partial and sometimes distorted representations of complex theological material. The intervention model presented here is designed in response to those patterns. Close the slide. The implication is practical. AI can be integrated into theological education, but only when its outputs are situated within processes of discernment rather than received as authoritative. Transition. Let me now apply this framework to three common scenarios in theological education. Scenario 1, automated lesson planning. This is not a hypothetical case. It is one of the most common AI deployments in theological education today. An educator uses a large language model to generate a 4-week theology unit, complete with objectives, discussion questions, and assessments. The efficiency gains are real. The structural quality may be adequate. The question, however, is not efficiency, it is formation. Framework evaluation. Applying the faithful intelligence framework clarifies the risk. Human dignity. Does this curriculum engage learners as persons within a specific community or as generic recipients of content? Stewardship. Who is responsible for the theological perspective embedded in this curriculum? The model or the institution? Discernment, high risk. Has the educator's contextual and pastoral judgment been displaced by automated generation? Accountability. If the curriculum misrepresents a tradition, who is responsible for that distortion? Case evidence. The Acadia Divinity College case provides a concrete example. President Anna Robbins and Technology Director John Campbell used ChatGPT to generate a full course syllabus on AI ethics. The structure was coherent, but the reading list skewed Baptist, reflecting bias in the model's training data. The result was not neutral, it was traditionally partial. Human correction was required before the course could be used responsibly. Interpretive conclusion, the framework explains why. AI systems can produce structural competence. They cannot produce contextual, tradition specific pastoral judgment. When used without intervention, AI shifts from tool to formative authority, shaping what is taught, how it is framed, and which traditions are centered. Close the slide. The issue, therefore, is not whether AI can generate curriculum. It is whether institutions remain responsible for the formation that curriculum produces. Transition, the assessment scenario makes these formation stakes even more direct. Scenario two, algorithmic grading. This is where the formation stakes become unavoidable. An AI system evaluates spiritual reflection essays using sentiment analysis and linguistic pattern recognition, returning scores and feedback within seconds. Research clarity. It is important to distinguish what the evidence shows and what it does not. What the research confirms, automated essay scoring systems demonstrate measurable bias and limitation. A 2025 ETS study by Johnson and Jang found that GPT-4 penalized Asian American students by 1.1 points on a 6-point scale compared to human raters and could predict the student's racial identity more accurately than it could evaluate essay quality. Systematic reviews further showed that these systems primarily assess surface level features, grammar, coherence, structure, while failing to capture creativity, emotional depth, and authentic voice. What the research does not yet confirm, there is no published study directly testing these systems on theological reflection essays in seminary contexts. This scenario, therefore, is an evidence informed risk analysis, not a documented institutional case. Formation argument, however, the formation argument does not depend on that empirical gap. Even if an AI grader were perfectly accurate and unbiased, something essential would still be lost. Sandage and colleagues demonstrate that evaluating spiritual formation is inherently relational. The act of reading, interpreting, and responding to a student's spiritual struggle is itself formative. A teacher who reads a lament and responds with pastoral attentiveness participates in formation. An algorithm that processes the same text does not. Interpretive conclusion, this is the critical distinction. AI can evaluate text, it cannot participate in formation. When grading is delegated to an automated system, the institution does not simply change tools, it removes a formative relationship. And in doing so, it risks replacing formation with measurement. Close the slide. The question, therefore, is not whether AI can score reflection, it is whether scoring can replace the relational act that formation requires. Transition, the third scenario, extends this further, showing how AI can flatten doctrinal complexity across traditions. Scenario three, the omniscient chatbot. This is the most epistemologically revealing case. A student asks an AI system, why does God allow suffering? The response is coherent and balanced. Suffering is understood differently across traditions, sometimes as a test, sometimes as growth, sometimes as mystery. It appears thoughtful. It is also theologically flattening. Judaism, in Jewish tradition, theodicy is not primarily a question to be resolved. It is an argument to be sustained. The concept of mashlaket lashem shamayim, disagreement for the sake of heaven, establishes that productive tension is itself a condition of learning. Holzer and Kent show that meaning emerges through interpersonal engagement, not through the delivery of conclusions. An AI-generated answer bypasses the argument, and in doing so, it bypasses the form of formation. Islam, in Islamic tradition, theodicy engages concepts such as hikmah, divine wisdom, and qadar, divine decree. But understanding these requires basira, spiritual insight, and taqwa, God consciousness. The 2025 Dar al-Ifta ruling prohibits AI from issuing fatwas precisely because these capacities cannot be automated. The same principle applies here. Knowledge is not only informational, it is spiritual and dispositional. Christianity, in Christian theology, suffering is not solved, it is entered. The cross and resurrection do not explain suffering, they locate God within it. An AI system can describe the doctrine, it cannot participate in its meaning. Interpretive conclusion, what the AI produces is not tradition but synthesis. Distinct theological epistemologies are collapsed into a single generalized response. The result is not neutral, it is flattening. And when presented with confidence, It functions as both epistemic and formative authority. Close the slide. The student, therefore, does not encounter tradition. They encounter a simulation of tradition, coherent, accessible, and fundamentally partial. Transition, these scenarios are grounded in documented mechanisms. The next section turns to real institutional cases.